Welcome back to Normal Islands. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'm joined by the brilliant Noffel. Noffel, I hope everything is well with you.
I'm doing very well, Curse. So I hope you're good too. I'm glad to be back on, and I'm glad to look at some stories with you.
Amazing. It's always a pleasure having you on. You have fantastic insights. We'd have you on more, but we only do 3 shows per week. Maybe we should probably increase that.
Yeah.
But this is what we've got coming up on tonight's show for you. Lucy Connolly has been released from prison. 20% of people would back a Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana party. And famine has been confirmed in Gaza City. As always, remember to like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. When we get into your comments at the end, so of course, make sure you're incredibly busy in the chat as you always are. But on with the show and on to our first story. Lucy Connolly has been released from prison. Connolly, who was married to a Tory councillor, was charged with incitement and sentenced to 31 months in prison. This is what she said during the summer of race riots last year. Mass deportations now set fire to all the effing hotels full of presumably bastards. For all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it. Now, ever since her sentence, the right wing have tried to make it out that she is some kind of political prisoner or martyr. They've spun a narrative of two-tiered justice. Yet for a while, they omitted the very important fact that she pled guilty to the charge. There was no chance for a judge and jury to give a verdict when the suspect gives an admission of guilt. Now, one can have a conversation if her sentence was too long. If I'm going to be completely honest, my personal view is it was too long. I don't think 31 months was fair. I think maybe a couple of months. But regardless, right, it is incorrect to question this sentence as two-tier. Now, two-tier absolutely exists, but not in the way the right wing spin it. If you're a climate activist, you get 5-year jail sentences just for discussing a protest on Zoom. Now, predictably, ever since her release, the beginning of a right-wing grifting career has already become apparent. Would you look at that? Despite being released from prison for committing a crime of incitement, Connolly has run straight into the arms of the right-wing media. Not only that, but Connolly might be meeting with the Trump administration. Breaking, Lucy Connolly will meet with Trump administration officials tomorrow and is preparing legal action against the police. I mean, I don't know what grounds she has to sue them. But anyways, I mean, Noffel, what can we expect? I mean, a brand new Lucy Connolly podcast or a slot on GB News?
I think we might get a slot on the Nelk Boys podcast first before any of those. But it's really funny that it's just been, day of release, and Lucy Connolly is already being eaten up by these right-wing medias and all these different influencers, along with, which I've seen on social media, along with the Trump administration and their obsession with free speech. But we need to make it really clear, this is not two-tier policing in the slightest, right? Lucy Connolly incited racial hatred to a group of asylum seekers, innocent people that are fleeing war and persecution, and made it very, very clear that if it makes her racist to burn down a hotel of such people, then so be it. Along with the fact that when the police were searching for other, messages that were on her communications device, such as her phone, she had made multiple statements about Somali men being rapists and other minorities being just as vile. So this is a grown adult who is complaining about the fact that she served just 9 months of her 31-month sentence, pled guilty to it, and is now a political prisoner. And what I find really interesting is Connolly mentions the fact that the UK has always been a free speech haven, but it's not. She was charged under the Malicious Communications Act, which came in 2003, but also incitement to incite racial hatred as a public order offence, which has been around just as long as her. It was brought in 1986, and Connolly was born in 1984. So this is a complete mischaracterization of Britain's legal system, which has always been like this. And I think it's the very fact that at this moment in time, it's very easy to capitalize off the fact that Britain's completely broken down economically. People are looking for answers, and people genuinely think that any move towards the right is actually being taken away and is actually discouraged by the Labour government. Whereas we know on the left that Labour have done everything to capitulate to it. So I'd be really interested to, see going forward what exactly is it that the narrative GB News will push and Connolly will push, maybe even the Trump administration will push towards where the UK is headed. Because I don't know about you, I can see a massive debate on free speech coming.
Yeah, it's interesting that. I mean, we can discuss about free speech because I think we need to have a conversation on what free speech actually entails. A lot of people don't understand it, and I think particularly the right wing. The reason why I say that is because the right wing have never been in favour of free speech. It's always been their speech and that's it. They become very, very authoritarian when you say something that they disagree with, right? But like when it comes to free speech, you can say a lot of things, but also you can criticize that. And they say, God, I'm being cancelled, but it's my free speech to criticize that. In terms of apparently suing the police, I mean, what grounds does Connolly have? How can she sue the police? She was arrested and then she pled guilty. This makes
Yeah.
no sense. What grounds does she have?
I think it's a spectacle. I think it's all about creating yourself as an anti-establishment figure for people to buy into this idea that, people like you and me, your average person, despite the fact she's married to a Tory councillor, are being persecuted for waving a British flag, for example, or saying things which are just branded as common sense. And I think it's interesting, it leans into the Trump administration as well, where, if we saw at the Brussels Security Conference, JD Vance talked about how generally in Europe there's this looming sort of feeling that free speech is no longer a thing. Whereas, like I've said, we have always had these laws since, the mid 80s. And so the way I see it is it's all about creating this image of your average British person that's really concerned about what's going on, rather than the fact that two-tier policing doesn't look like persecuting people for wanting to burn down a hotel of innocent people, which if happened would be a terrorist attack, right? It's more so about the fact that free speech in itself by these right wing press, by these politicians, it was mainly used to say, look, if you are in cahoots with what the establishment is saying, then by all means say whatever you want. But when it comes to being protesting in favor of Palestine action, when it's to do with protesting against things like the Online Safety Act, when it's to do with protesting against just general things, right? That is not allowed and that will not fly. So we need to be really clear on where the two-tier policing really is, because it's not against the right, it's in favor of the right. It's actually against the left. And these people are essentially the establishment putting on a cloak saying that they're the average person when in fact they're just vying for them and batting for them.
What I find quite funny about this as well is if Lucy Connolly feels like she's being mistreated by the government, right, she could use the ECHR to say, look, I feel like I've been persecuted. I feel like my rights have been attacked, which is funny because the right wing want to leave the ECHR. But this is exactly, this is where their calls for the ECHR is another grift, right? It's a political calculation that when it comes, if we were to leave it, right, then what the government says you kind of have to accept. There's no other legal body that stands with you. But ironically, she could actually go to them. Now, I don't know if she'd be successful or not, because I think she's wrong on this, of course. But there is that extra body there that can say, hold on a second, we need to see if she's in breach of human rights here. And these people want to leave it. These people want to leave it.
Yeah. I think, and there is a sense of irony there, which is, Lucy Connolly as herself is not someone that is a part of the media establishment or necessarily the government, but generally speaking, she's more or less a normal person. And it's really these sort of stories you see on the right, which is just your average person. And we saw this with Carl Rittenhouse, for example, in the US, where it's your average person who then out of nowhere gets a bunch of capital injected into their bank account and they're appearing on all these different podcasts as this working class hero. And that is something that could happen to Connolly. And the deep irony is if it doesn't, because we don't really have that sphere in the UK, then when she genuinely wants to protest against something that is against her, and we all know that reform, for example, or anyone that she might cozy up to is not for the working person. When someone's genuine rights are breached, then it will be people that have been misled under the right that would say, wow, that ECHR thing, I really wish I had it. And I really, really wish that I just would have taken my sentence and shut the fuck up. So I have no sympathy for her. She is a grown adult. She knows what she did. And this is one of the rare scenarios where I will be happy to say, we told you so.
Quite right. No sympathy for her. She is a grown adult. Fantastic. Then we are going to move on to our next story. 1/5 of voters could be open to supporting the Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana party. A new Ipsos the UK poll reveals that the left-wing political party recently founded by former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and MP Zara Sultana could capture a significant segment of the British electorate. Over 20% of British adults say they would be very or fairly likely to consider voting for a new left-wing party. This figure, however, masks a sharp generational divide. A third of those aged 16 to 34 would consider voting for the new party, a figure that drops to 22% among 35 to 54-year-olds and just 9% among those aged 55 and over. The potential for this new party to disrupt the existing political landscape is most evident in its appeal to voters of other left-leaning parties. 1/3 of those who voted Labour in 2024 and 43% of 2024 Green Party voters would consider lending their vote to a Corbyn-Sultana-led party. Now, these numbers are huge, right? It shows there is potentially real support for this new party, and recent favourable polling for them hasn't been a fluke. But what's interesting is the 43% figure of the Greens. I mean, that could rise as certain constituencies may be more favourable to the new party than the Greens, leaving the Green or Green Party voters to opt to vote tactically. And imagine a real left-wing progressive alliance. We've been waiting for that for years, haven't we? This, of course, is more bad news for the Labour Party, with recent polling putting them on as low as 18% without the inclusion of the New Left Party, proving that they are splitting the vote themselves. Recent comments from Wes Streeting shows that whilst he acknowledges they are facing problems, he still hasn't grasped why they are losing support. Labour has failed to tell a coherent story about the change it has delivered since last year's general election, Wes Streeting has admitted. The Health Secretary said Sir Keir Starmer's party has had a whole number of achievements since coming to power last July, but has not done enough to convince voters it is changing the country for the better. But he urged Sir Keir not to allow Mr Farage to set the agenda, adding that our most successful moments in the last 12 months have been where we have set the agenda. He said people want to feel change. They want to feel like the government is driving the country forward in the right direction. We mustn't fall into the trap of letting Farage set the terms of the debates for us. Now, that last paragraph encapsulates how out of touch he is. I mean, Labour have categorically allowed Reform to set the terms of the debate. I mean, the times where Labour set their own agenda, well, they went after pensioners by removing the winter fuel allowance, right? Refusing to scrap the 2-child benefit cap and cutting benefits. No one forced Labour to do these things. It's entirely their own doing. What's more, he doesn't see that the problem is also policies. It's not that they haven't sold the story of the party well enough. It's that Labour haven't meaningfully changed things, right? People don't just want a slight reduction in waiting times. People want transformational change. Noffel, before I ask you about Wes Streeting's comments, I mean, what do you make of these recent polls?
Not surprised by any means. I mean, Labour has itself completely destroyed its left-wing base because, you can't actually appeal to left-wing voters if you keep purging left-wing MPs and keep doing non-left-wing things like you said and talked about, cutting the winter fuel allowance and doing massive welfare cuts. So this should come as a surprise to no one, really. What I'm interested is also looking at the Green Party, right? Because, maybe people could push back on this a bit. Although I like the Green Party under Polanski, I do see Labour possibly appealing to, even if slightly according to that polling, the older demographic more. Maybe possibly because Corbyn has your party appealing to that older vote a bit more than the Greens. Maybe specifically because under Polanski it might be a bit left and it may not appeal to as many Conservative voters. But also along with the fact that Corbyn generally is a name that's more recognised in deindustrialised heartlands. So I'm looking for hopefully there being some sort of progressive alliance there to boost those numbers more. But what we are seeing in general is that massive, just 20% is a large demographic of voting population. But it's not just to be looked at as people that are voting for a political party. It's to be also looked at that 20% of the UK are, that voting demographic are putting their vote behind someone they know they can trust, because that 20% are so extremely economically depressed. The state of the country has gotten so bad, from the job market, from wages being suppressed, from the housing market, that people are willing to do anything at this point. And I think it speaks volumes that this is in response to a Labour government from the left. So the way I see it is, it's not just people that are looking to put their vote somewhere, but it's 20% of people in that polling that are saying enough is enough. We genuinely need real change in this country. I think you're mute, Curtis.
I've never done that before. I've muted myself.
It's first time for everything, I
It's
suppose.
first time for everything, yeah. What I'm saying is, it's very interesting what you said about the heartlands, because I do think there are certain constituencies where the Green Party might struggle, but there are other constituencies where they might do better than your party. But for example, as a personal anecdote, I was in Aberfare, near Merthyr Tydfil, actually, a real old working class place, left behind place, proper traditional Labour heartlands, which of course is seeing a big sweep for reform in Wales. And I was having a conversation with someone, went into one of those old classic old men pubs, right? I love those. I like my fancy bougie places, but I also like my old man pubs. And I went in there and I was having a conversation with obviously one of the locals, and he was saying how much he hated Thatcher. And I was like, oh, well, let me buy you a drink, sir. I love this conversation when it starts with Thatcher. But I was also expecting him to say, and that's why we need reform, because so many times I've had conversations where people will say, absolutely despise where the Labour Party has ended up. I used to be Labour. Thatcher ruined everything. And then they say we need reform, right? But he said, you know what? I just love Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was the only one for me who felt like he actually represented old traditional Labour values in some way. I mean, he's socially way more progressive than what you would consider old traditional values. But in terms of the economy, it was far more of a hark back to Clement Attlee, whether it's industrial policy, whether it's public ownership, something that Blairism and Keir Starmer has completely ignored or destroyed. And this man was saying, yeah, I mean, I really supported Jeremy Corbyn. Like, there's still that support in the old sort of traditional Labour heartlands. In terms of what you're saying in terms of Labour maybe having more of a headway with older people, I mean, they technically would, because they're an established political party. They always have that. But remember, when it comes to the winter fuel allowance, I mean, I think they've really lost that. Labour have never been popular with older people. It's always been Conservatives. Now they're going to reform. So I don't know about you, but I personally don't really mind that much if the Greens or your party don't make headway with older people, because the divide in this country isn't actually class, it's more to do with age. Class plays a role, but age is the biggest factor when it comes to political divides.
Yeah, no, I think you make an interesting point there, and that's a fair assessment to make. The way I would look at it as well is also, I mean, I guess you could say as well that the Green Party, despite under Polanski, could also just generally, I know we're not really talking about the age divide. We know guaranteed that some sort of left-wing alliance will guarantee the young vote. I mean, that's concrete. But there is also generally a feeling amongst older voters of caring for the environment. And I do genuinely think that that is somewhere where Polanski could make headway in, right? Because even under the Green Party with Ellie and Adrian, we've seen that they can win more conservative-minded areas. And so, although the older demographic isn't necessarily one that we should be so keen to win on, because it's particularly a bit harder for the left, I think possibly one could make the argument that that is something that the Green Party could gain as well, just because old people in rural areas tend to care a lot about the environment as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that's kind of the pitch from Ellie Jones and Adrian Ramsey. You know, Adrian Ramsey won in Waveney Valley, ex-Conservative place. It's a very, you could call it a Tory Green place, right? Because there is I don't know how big it is, especially with the new influx of members of that Green Tory cohort who are very conscious about the environment. And most people in this country do care about the environment. They really do, actually. Yeah. People are quite pro-green policies, actually, despite the right-wing media saying net zero is a load of rubbish. And I think that Adrian and Ramsey are trying to say that they represent that more. So, I mean, I haven't seen any data to suggest this, but they could say, actually, Zach Polanski becoming leader might bring in more younger people and ex-Corbyn voters or socialists, but could actually lose the sort of Green Tory cohort. Now, I think we should favour the socialists and young people over that, but obviously both would be great. Their argument would be that Zach Polansky might lose on that front.
Well, it's an understandable concern, but like you said earlier as well, if the Green Party doesn't make headway there, you provided an anecdote where your party could, right? Because like I said, Corbyn is a recognizable name in these heartlands, specifically because when people have been asking for transitions to jobs, that is where Corbyn stepped in, and he's talked about these industrial heartlands, which have been forgotten about, even post Thatcher. It's not necessarily like, Tony Blair cared about these areas either, right? For decades, we have seen the fact that no one has really supported these deindustrialized heartlands, but Corbyn's been there, and he always has been. So, I understand, the argument, but I do also think, we should focus generally on urban areas too, because that's where a lot of the vote will be coming in from for young people. So, old people, how do I say it in the most nice way possible? I mean, the older demographic vote is important. Could your party make some headway there? Sure. But, ultimately, like you said, there is also needing to be a focus on the Green Party, specifically gathering some more votes in urban areas, because that's where Ellie and Adrian are just not making any headway at the moment in big enough numbers.
I mean, finally, this brings us back to the original point. I mean, what's your thoughts on Wes Streeting, right? He understands that Labour have failed to tell a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
He still seems to not get why so many people stopped supporting them, right? He didn't say anything about, in that Guardian paragraph, anything about the policies. He just said, actually, when we set the agenda, we were very successful. And again, I reiterate, the agenda largely has been set by Nigel Farage when it comes to immigration. But the policies that they've come up themselves, which is the winter fuel allowance or scrapping it, keeping the 2-child benefit cap, like these are things that they didn't get asked to do, yet they did it. So actually, the things that I think of the Labour Party in this Labour government, when it's been on their terms, it's been disastrous policies like that. Wes Streeting clearly is still out of touch, and he doesn't get it, and that's not just for Wes Streeting, that's probably for the rest of the Labour Party.
I think I said on the first time I ever appeared on this show, when you asked me a question about Wes Streeting, and I said I could see him running for a leader role, right? Because I said he's so slimy in the way that he deals with politics, and the fact he's amassed now about £311,000, right, from private healthcare donations. There's clearly a guy that knows politics and how to play it. And I don't necessarily think it's all about the fact that Wes Streeting applies to this new Labour agenda, which is just continuing neoliberalism with a red rosette. I think it's just genuine because the capital he's acquired since the election just means he doesn't give a fuck. Because he is getting that money in order to make sure and parrot this idea that Labour is still for the working man. However, money and lobbying is what rules politics at the end of the day. And Wes Streeting wants and continues to bring in that capital. And I think, therefore, he will continue to make these brazen-faced, stupid narratives at the fact that, it's just Labour that has won in the last 12 months by setting the agenda, when we know when Labour has tried to set the agenda, they have failed spectacularly, and people have hated them for it. When it comes to the winter fuel allowance, when it comes to disability cuts, when it's come to the prescriptions of Palestine action, everyone has actually hated when Labour has pulled up their socks, for example, and made a big statement, because they've done everything to capitulate to the right. So the way I see Wes Streeting is just another lobbied, corrupt politician, not necessarily just in the fact, like you mentioned, that there's a general idea in the Labour Party that they are just, making tough changes, but also the fact that this guy is getting lobbied to fuck with, and he's the health minister, and that genuinely makes me very concerned that we've got such a slimy politician in such a high place there, and he's amongst one of the worst in the Labour Party, in my view.
I absolutely agree with that. Could not agree more. Well said. But let's move on. Before we go on to our final story, as always, remember to like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. If you want us to grow, then you can head over turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member for just 99p. Now, on to our final story. In Gaza right now, people are starving to death. The UN has declared a full-blown famine in the last 24 hours. At least 2 Palestinians died of hunger, not from drought, not from disaster, but because Israel has blocked food, water, and fuel. This is a man-made famine, a deliberate act of war.
Be in no doubt that this is irrefutable testimony. It is a famine, the Gaza famine. It is a famine that we could have prevented if we had been allowed. Yet food stacks up at borders because of systematic obstruction by Israel. It is a famine within a few hundred meters of food in a fertile land. It is a famine in 2025, a 21st century famine, watched over by drones and the most advanced military technology in history. It is a famine openly promoted by some Israeli leaders as a weapon of war. It is a famine on all of our watch. Everyone owns this. The Gaza famine is the world's famine. It is a famine that asks, but what did you do? A famine that will and must haunt us all.
A famine that says, what did you do? Those words ring so powerfully, given how so many people are still excusing this genocide. Now, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated, just when it seems there are no words left to describe the living hell in Gaza, a new one has been added, famine. He described it as, I'll start that again. He described it as not a mystery, but rather a man-made disaster, a moral indictment, and a failure of humanity itself. He added that Israel has unequivocal obligations under international law, including the duty of ensuring food and medical supplies of the population. Now, over 100 aid organisations, Oxfam, Amnesty, others, say Israel is weaponising hunger, using starvation as policy. Amnesty calls it part of an ongoing genocide, and they're right. Starving a population of 2 million isn't an accident, it's an intentional war crime. This is not new. History is repeating itself. Colonial powers have always used hunger as a weapon. Britain in Bengal, Ireland, countless others. Israel's siege of Gaza is the same colonial logic, settler power crushing the indigenous through famine and force. This is all coming after Netanyahu's finalisation of his plan to seize Gaza City, displacing 1 million people. The Palestinian Interior Ministry calls it a death sentence, facing corruption trials and political ruin. He clings to power through massacres. It's pretty simple. The genocide continues because Netanyahu needs it to. But let's not pretend it's all about one man. Gaza has been under blockade since 2007. Apartheid, occupation, dispossession. These are systemic, baked into the state itself. If Netanyahu fell tomorrow, another leader would carry on unless the whole structure of settler colonialism is dismantled. Now, none of us are surprised that there are people trying to spin certain headlines. Exhibit A, supposed journalist Melanie Phillips said, Israel helps evacuate cancer sufferer from Gaza to Italy. She dies there of leukemia. BBC suggests Israel starved her to death. To the BBC, even cancer is Israel's fault. I mean, yes, that's right. Israel starving cancer-stricken people, and Zionists defending it thinks that makes them look good. Now, in this specific example Philip shared, it was categorically found that starvation was the cause of death, not leukemia. The 20-year-old Palestinian woman evacuated to Italy did not suffer from cancer. She was starved to death by Israel and its backers. Doctors in Italy ruled out leukemia and blamed malnourishment. Israeli propagandists are now spreading disinformation. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this example is because people have been making excuses, trying to pin the starvation deaths on cancer. It doesn't take rocket science to understand that starving people with serious illnesses will make their chances of survival dramatically drop. Nothing. Would this declaration of famine be enough to end this genocide?
I don't think it will. In late 2023, we had the UN say that Gaza and its people will face up to 93% of the entire population uh, severe food insecurity. By late 2024, you had the UN's early warning systems for famine essentially say by April we will see famine conditions. In both cases, following, nothing happened, right? And where we are today, we still see the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation trapping and killing Palestinians en masse for getting mere bags of flour with trained Blackwater mercenaries standing there, same ones that were deployed in Iraq, essentially shooting at children. Um, and I don't think there will be a stop to this so long as the West, including the US and the UK, does not put any pressure onto Israel or doesn't pressure international organizations to essentially do more, there will be absolutely no move towards the end of this genocide. And that is simply because, flat out, the UK and the US support it. It's really that simple. As long as the UK and US support and continue to support this, nothing will stop. And I do ask myself, we are seeing extremely distressing, horrific images of the genocide coming out of Gaza every single day. And I ask myself every day, when will it stop? What will it take? But I just genuinely don't know. I think it will get to a point where Gaza has been exhausted, as we have seen multiple times with the stopping of ceasefires, with the ongoing of ceasefires. We have seen doctors on the ground say that people are now at a point where they are absolutely exhausted. They can't even line up for surgery anymore, whereas they could do a couple months ago, because they are genuinely that horrified with the ongoing genocide and the pausing and resuming of everything that's going on. So the way I see it is it will take the West to intervene as always and do something, as they are the main propagators of this. When that will happen and what will it take and what image of Gaza we will have to see to actually stop this, I have absolutely no clue, because as far as I've seen and many others, pardon me, sorry, it makes me sick, right? I have seen the worst images come out of Gaza. So I genuinely don't know what it will take for Starmer or Trump to turn around and say enough is enough, because the red line was crossed almost a year ago.
Yeah, no, it's hard to see how any of these people who are complicit are suddenly going to turn around and say, well, this is wrong now. You've done it for so long. What would change their minds? Nothing. I want to talk about the use of hunger as a weapon, right? Historically, colonial powers have often used starvation to subjugate people, from colonial era famines to siege warfare. So in your view, how does what Israel is doing in Gaza echo those brutal colonial tactics? I mean, are we essentially witnessing a 21st century siege and colonial style collective punishment in Gaza? And are we seeing the militarization of aid?
Yeah, 100% we are. And it's extremely similar, like you pointed out, towards what happened in Ireland, what happened with the Bengal famine, where what we're seeing is long before October the 7th as well, following the blockade that happened in 2007, 2008 of the Gaza Strip, what we saw in documents leaked in 2012 is the Israeli government purposefully were trying to calculate the minimum amount of calories that a Gazan and Palestinian would need to just simply survive, just above starvation. And that's exactly the same policy that was used in Ireland to make sure to basically control the population that was subject to colonial rule, in order to sort of force them and militarize that sort of aid and just simply food to basically bend their will in order to be more amenable to whatever policy was going to be passed next. So it's not new. It's something that Britain has done for years and years. And by no surprise, when we prop up the state of Israel as a glorified military base in the Middle East, it should be to no one's surprise that they're doing the exact same thing there. And it all comes down to the fact that, this isn't necessarily just Israel and Zionism as an ideology that has allowed for this sort of colonial policy to pass and this controlling of the population of a native people to a land. But this speaks more about imperialism as a whole and where that comes from. Because when we take a look at the actions that are being taken part by the IDF, it's not just to replace the Palestinian people, but it's because we find it really useful to have Israel out in the Middle East to sort of counter these different axes and spheres of influence, because we want to stay in the Middle East. That's all we've ever wanted to do. And it will all the roads lead down to one thing, and that is material conditions, that is capital, that is the system as itself. So it's important to remember that although this is a story about Zionist domination, that Zionist domination itself has come from European colonialism, which itself is a reaction to capital, the ever expanding need for resources on a finite planet. And when you can't find it at home, you'll find it somewhere else.
Quite right, quite right. Let's leave the stories there, but we'll go to our producer for your comments. Sarah, welcome.
Hello. I should wait for the introduction before I start screaming down your ear like hello.
You can scream what you like.
I tend to do that always. No, it's really, really great show, and lots of comments. First, shout out to Specs, always showing up.
Always showing up.
Always, Specs. We see you every time we're live, so thank you. 5 gift memberships. So let's go to comments just quickly. We'll start from the top. So a lot of comments on Lucy. So we'll just go from there. Michael says, two-tier justice. Wonder if she's met any of the 500 people arrested for holding Palestine action placards. I don't even know if Lucy could define two-tier justice in the way that it should be defined, to be honest. Yeah, there's lots of comments about her. Let's just carry on. Carl says, of course, she's the real victim here, right? No shame in these people. And it's interesting how, like, things are going in the direction of her being victimized. Like, she was failed by a system that didn't allow her to speak freely. And my worry is that she's going to capitalize on that. And you'd mentioned that, both of you had mentioned that she may capitalize on this with the media exposure she's going to have as a result of this. Lots of comments, we'll just get through them. Spec says, free speech for who is the question? MAGA and the broader right just want to be able to say the N-word and call people the arselow, which they already can. Freedom of speech stuff is so exhausting. What do you guys think?
Guys?
I was going to let you go first.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, thank you. I think I do think that Specs makes a good point, because I think it's literally seeing the UK and the country as just another market to push MAGA politics in, right? What we've seen in the past year is an increase into funding into these think tanks and all these different organizations like Turning Point USA that are coming now to the UK under Turning Point UK and spreading these sort of collection of policies that the Trump cabinet has been so fond of, which is anti-abortion shit, anti-trans stuff, free speech stuff. And like I said, we had JD Vance at the Brussels Security Conference say Europe as a whole has lost its touch with free speech, which we know is bullshit. But Specs is right. It's all about essentially what they like as speech that they can say and what others aren't allowed to say. And if you whittle that down, that basically means that, hey, if this speech is profitable, then it's allowed. If this speech isn't profitable, then it's not allowed. If you want to speak about Palestine, you're getting fucking deported. However, if you want to bang on about culture wars, be my guest and I will actually give you funding to do that. So I think it's just generally importing that sort of politics over to the UK, because the UK is just seen as another market for the US, and our leaders will let them do it because they don't give a fuck and they get money to do so.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about platforms, and that's something that needs to be within the conversation of free speech, is the size of someone's platforms. No speech is equal, right? You can be a leftist and try and start up your own media organization, and 4 years in, we're still working voluntary, right? Versus GB News, which started with tens of millions of pounds from the Legatum Institute, now owned by, or one of the owners is Paul Marshall, right? A particular kind of speech, which is the right wing, has money, and the money gives you that platform. You know, how many right wing content creators blow up so quickly? It's because they're backed by capital, and that sort of speech is far more powerful than other speech. And it's very funny to see that those on the right talk about being cancelled and how they don't get their free speech. They've always had it, right? Even if these people like to think the BBC is left-wing. It's not, but even if it was, the amount of times we hear someone on another podcast or radio station saying, I've been cancelled. Look, if you were really cancelled, we wouldn't hear of you. You'd no longer exist to us, right? You cannot be cancelled if you're telling the world that you've been cancelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great point. And it kind of brings us to this one, like the risk of glamorizing her. Like you mentioned this at the beginning of your I was gonna say your speech, your script, um, about her being seen as some sort of martyr. Like how much attention should we actually give Lucy? How important is it to speak about her with everything that's happened? But on top of that, the media and their focus on her release, I think, can risk glamorizing her slightly as well. Like, hey, the master's now out. Like, what do you guys make of this? And like, is there a risk there of glamorization? I actually didn't read this out. Why should Lucy, a convicted criminal who incited violence against refugees, be given attention or glamorized at all? So, what do you guys think?
I mean, I think attention is fair. I would say it's more so the fact that, you know, this sort of thing could have been done had she not been given a massive platform now, right? It's basically the fact she's come out straight away and she's been given a platform by possibly the Trump admin and the other right-wing press. But I think that the reaction to this should not be to talk about, you know, specific details of her arrest or specific sentence stuff. Just brand her as what she is, and that is a racist. She genuinely wanted a group of people to burn collectively. And so the only attention she should get is by letting everyone know she's a piece of shit, and nothing more than that. Not trying to push the limits of a free speech debate, because that is, like Curtis mentioned, like before the stream started, like it will turn into some sort of weird debate later on of them changing the sort of goalpost to not make it about Lucy Connolly, but make it about a new topic that you can insert a culture war into.
I also don't buy this old idea, and we hear it on the left a lot, which is don't talk about these people, don't platform these people, you give them time. I no longer agree with that. I don't know if I ever really agreed with it, but I certainly don't now. And the reason why I say that is because you have to understand that platforms exist out of our own hands. We don't get a say on it, right? People kind of now and again criticize me for when I go on GB News and they say you're legitimizing the platform, and I say they get more viewers than Sky. Right, and what Ben says is really good is actually they're legitimizing us. So we actually have a sort of a benefactor from that. But like, I don't like this idea, which is like you can't speak about this because they're getting platformed. Unfortunately, the political sphere is dominated, as it always has, but far more now, is dominated by the right and the far right. And whether we speak about it or not makes zero difference. Now, what we can do is our best with little voices and little money we have is to push back on it, because that's all we can do. And you might not change much, but you may have an argument that lands really, really well that convinces people. Or at least you can arm your own viewers with arguments. So even though it doesn't work in the sphere of debating on TV debates or not, and you're not convincing any GB News viewers or whatever, but someone could hear a really good argument from one of us and then say it to one of their mates in the pub. And it's a bit different. You're given a bit more leeway. If you're having a discussion with one of your mates who's right-wing or whatever, they'll more likely hear you out than some random punter off the TV. So I think like we can't not talk about this Lucy Letwick story, because it doesn't matter. Especially with us, we've got not even 30,000 subscribers versus all these platforms that have millions and millions of views. So we need to stop. I personally think we need to stop this idea of we can't platform this or that. We need to get in there and try and push back as much as we can.
Facts. I agree with that completely. I agree. And it is down to independent media outlets like ourselves to do that. So I completely agree with you. Going on to the second story, Edward said the good news there is the support for the new party / Green Pact is potential dynamite. And it's true. Like, I think everyone's like, so I was having a conversation with someone today actually on TikTok, and they said, well, the issue with your party is that it's going to break the left up. And I was like, no, actually, on the contrary. Like, you've got Corbyn and Sultana basically saying they'd be open to working with Polanski, and Polanski saying the same thing. So I think that is formidable in and of itself. And then this one was interesting as well. I'd listened to arguments for Adrian as leader if someone could make the briefcase for him.
I started that one. It was a joke.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, because it's a joke.
Dead.
He could make the briefcase for him. Do you not get it?
Oh, Jim.
Quick off the mark there.
Jim, pack it in. God, it's Friday.
It's always yeah. It was always Jim with
Jim's always coming
bangers, isn't it?
Great jokes.
So I can make a briefcase for him. Good one.
So jokes. Jacqueline says, I hate how they term left-wing policies as radical, but never right-wing ones. Wasn't that just privatization of public services radical? Wasn't that just right to buy radical? Yeah. What do you guys think? I completely fucking agree.
I mean, these people need to be aware of libertarianism, the most radical ideology out there, which is literally little to no government, no regulation, nothing, and just let shit happen, which is like, oh, that works in theory, but it doesn't work in real life. That's fucking radical. I would say privatization is insanely radical because it has bad outcomes and there was no logical reason to do it. Like I would say they're fucking radical, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about how neoliberalism, how the right talks about the left. You know, it sounds great in theory, but it's terrible in practice, and it leads to millions of people dying of starvation. And it's completely authoritarian to expect people to pay for water. But it's true. It's like, you know, the concept of neoliberalism itself, which Thatcher bought. You know, it is a radical idea to just insert markets everywhere, like in places like water. Because if you talk to someone about the idea of, like, in most developed nations, in most OECD nations, hey, do you think you should pay for water? They'll just look around you with a weird look and be like, no, obviously not. But it's the norm in the UK because of Reagan and Thatcher's ideas. So I think it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, because I see radical politics as someone who considers themselves a left-wing radical, right? Radical politics is just purely ideological. So, for example, as a socialist, I'll argue for things such as public ownership, which isn't socialist, it's social democratic. And I argue for these things not on the basis of ideology, but on the basis of logic, right? We know that privatization has failed. Why are we paying for services twice? We're paying for the service and then we're paying for the profits that, you know, the shareholders make off it, and they give us a really bad service. Look how privatization has worked. When I argue for public ownership, I don't say, oh, because it's fair. I never say that. I say because it makes logical sense. But then as an ideologue myself, I then call for socialism because I think the means of production should be held in the hands of its workers, right? Now, I obviously have my logical arguments as to why I think it works, but that's still only on paper. That's not in practice. That could, it could never work. Potentially, it might be something that doesn't work, but I still argue for it because I admit I'm a radical, right? Yet the right wing will characterize anything that's basically not far right as radical. Increasing spending. Now, I would say Keynesian economics is not radical; it's logical. My politics is way to the left of Keynesism because I am radical. But a lot of the times, left wing and left wing radical people argue for centre left social democracy, which social democracy is not radical. And the right don't really understand that. Now, their politics is radical because it's ethno-nationalism. There's no logical basis for it. It's because what they want. They're just racist. That's anything you couldn't consider not radical because there's no logical reason as to why you came to that conclusion apart from, black people make me scared.
Yeah. It's very
exactly
true.
So illogical. Blah blah blah, sorry, I lost myself. Edward said no. So this is the last story. No question to the academic and legal debate that it's genocide now. Literally anyone who attempts to question it needs their brain checked. Like I don't know how much people need to see in order for them to realize that what's happening is completely unfathomable. I was watching Channel 4 before I came on here, and one of the columnists for Haaretz, like the Israeli paper, said that, like, he speaks to his friends and he shows them pictures of what's happening in Gaza, and he says that people in Israel are so delusional at this point. Like, they will make an excuse for anything that happens. They say, oh, a starving child, that must be AI, or you got a picture from Sudan, like that, or that's a picture from Afghanistan. Like, they have completely been blinded by propaganda, that they don't get shown what happens in Gaza at all, and when they are shown it, it's completely doubted. So yeah, I don't know how. I think there are some people that still need to be convinced that it's a genocide. And so go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say one thing. Like, it just proves Israel is genuinely not a normal society, and I say this all the time. Like that, it's genuinely a really, really fucking extreme society. When you have like upwards of 40% of your demographic polling say it's okay to rape Palestinian prisoners. We should not pretend this country is just like another sovereign state.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
actually, it's a really fucked up country. It's a really it's extremely comparable. And I said this the other day to someone on TikTok, to like the Deep South during
Yes.
slavery, which basically had like de facto apartheid as well.
Mm.
Like we shouldn't pretend like they are normal. They're not. They're
Mm.
really
I mean,
fucking.
every accusation's confession, because we hear from Israel apologists that, well, Palestinians and Arabs are radical. They're just massive anti-Semites, which I haven't seen. Like, I can't say that doesn't exist, but like, we have seen polling data of the average view of an Israeli person who lives in Israel. And you're absolutely right. They are some of the most fucked up opinions they have. I remember a few years ago, Abby Martin, fantastic journalist, by the way, went to Tel Aviv and she did some vox pops. And honestly, every single answer was pretty horrific. You know, the questions were like, should we just get rid of all Palestinians and take over the land? They're like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And polling shows that they don't go far enough. So these Israel apologists want to say that apparently Palestinians are radical. And the difference is, right, you're going to radicalize Palestinians because of their material conditions. Yet we have a so-called liberal democracy, which it isn't, who live comfortably. I mean, they're like a first world nation within the Middle East because of all the funding that we and others give to them, right? And they have this fucked up view. They don't have an excuse to be radical because their material conditions are one of what you can compare to the West. Whereas in Palestine, in Gaza, I mean, you have nothing. Everything has been completely destroyed.
True.
Love Abby Martin, by the way. And then just last two, Jacqueline said the Palestinian people in Gaza not only need food and other aid coming in, but they need nutrition experts to deal with the people who are severely malnourished. And it's true, like if you start feeding them just copious amounts of food, that's not actually going to solve the issue.
Kill them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And then Rachel said this as our final comment. They were, quote unquote, put on a diet for many years before this manufactured famine. So true.
Yeah.
So true. But that's it for the comments. Really, really great show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Much appreciated. But that is, of course, all we have time for. Thank you to our viewers who tuned in, of course. And, of course, thank you to Noffel for joining me tonight. Incredible analysis, as always. Remember to like this stream. And if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. And I will see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.